Thanks, Nicola. So we're moving seamlessly onwards. So I'm Gordon McFarlane, board member, immediate past president, and director of HR and OD in Newham. Delighted to introduce Owen Mapley, who I'm sure will say a little bit more about himself, but Chief Exec of CIPFA. And we've got a 45-minute session on summarised, I think, as public sector finance priorities and challenges, and there's a lot in there. And I think, Owen, you're not using slides, just going to talk to us. So that makes the tech a bit simpler, but without further ado, I shall hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Can I just get a thumbs up? You can hear me clearly?
Can hear you.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, firstly, hello, and thank you so much for the invitation. I've got a huge regard for all people managers. I know from my time in central and local government, often in finance roles, but also in a chief exec role, just the crucial importance of all of us with a background in resources. What does that mean? Well, it's usually people and money to do stuff. And so your work, the professionals I support now in my new role, finance practitioners, it's so important. They work hand in glove. So a huge thank you from me for everything that you do. There's a lot of change going on. And I was delighted to come in right at the end of that last session to hear that sort of thing about supporting each other, because from my experience working with senior HR practitioners, there's often a question about who's supporting you. You put so much into supporting everybody else. So making sure that you use your networks, your associations, etc., really important, because we know it's tough, which I'll unpack a bit more. So just very briefly, myself, I'm sure I know some of you, but my background, private sector first, then a stint in central government. I was a CFO in a couple of big government departments, and then I moved into local government in Hertfordshire. I was 151 and then chief exec at the county council there. But for the last year, I've been at CIPFA and thoroughly enjoying a new challenge. Many of you may have heard of CIPFA, but when I changed jobs, many people told me something different about what CIPFA was. So just very briefly, who are we? We are an accountancy institute. We're a membership body. Our mission is to be the home of professional excellence in public finance. And we're organised around three core areas. CIPFA Thinks, which our role as a thought leader, as a standard setter, as a voice and influence. CIPFA Develops, our work as an educator, as a host of a member community, etc. And then CIPFA Supports, acting as an improvement partner. So the first one, Thinks, is for everybody in the environment at large. The second one for the individual finance practitioners. Third one for the organisations, the public service organisations those people work in. So that's me and CIPFA. Well, let me just sort of set out a few thoughts, and then we'll hopefully turn it into a conversation. I'm sure you've already touched on in previous sessions and others. We know that it's a tough environment at the moment, that relentless increases in volume of demand, cost of demand, complexity of demand, all within a world of resource constraints, and those constraints both on the money and on workforce. And on top of that, operational business as usual, huge volumes of reform, and much of it is welcome and long overdue, but it's still demanding, and much of it creates uncertainties, the likelihood of major organisational change and or redundancy, directly impacting our people and your work supporting our people. We've been talking LGR, so I won't go into any detail. But there's also broader context around some of the societal cohesion challenges that we're seeing on our streets. Do you take the flags down or not is a question that we've just been debating in a conference I'm currently at. So political volatility is leading to greater levels of public criticism, sometimes from elected officials on officers. So that's a really challenging macro context, which will be hard at the best of times. But of course, constrained resources, finances mean it's really tricky for many working in public service at the moment. So if I start with a few positives, though, I think I've been at CIP for about a year, and the government's been in post about a year, and clearly they're having some challenges at the moment. But I do think there is credit due that, as I say, much of these reforms that are underway, they are long overdue. And at least they have grasped the nettle on things like funding reform. So there is scope for greater certainty, greater flexibility on finances, and finally, multi-year financial settlements, which should help. We're still waiting really for major announcements from the new ministerial team in both education, in local government, etc. But previous teams were saying, well, their view that when you take LGR and Devo, plus funding reform, well, that fixes the foundations of many organisations. And my view, well, yeah, they're necessary, but is that sufficient? Because the reality on the ground is still hugely challenging. We know that exceptional financial support, there were 30 local authorities that needed that last year, and I think there'll be plenty more this autumn. Is that good? Well, if the Chancellor makes a great stay, rightly probably, of her golden rules around not borrowing to fund day to day, well, that's exactly what too many of our public service organisations are being forced to do. I do think there's a risk of greater Section 114s being issued. And we know that high needs deficits, the statutory override that means they haven't been confronted yet, they need major policy reform. We've got promises for reforms this autumn, but we all know that delivering tricky reform in a volatile political environment where any sense of change or tweak is pounced on as a U-turn, it's just really hard to deliver that. So we're still years away, really, from those reforms impacting on demand. I'm pleased to see multi-year financial settlements. That's great. We've been after it for ages. But again, the reality of the timing just now, with a late budget at the end of November, I mean, a late financial settlement just before Christmas, early next year, many councils will be gearing up for elections immediately after those budgets are set. So the reality, I think, is that for many councils, it'll be 1+2 rather than a sort of clean 3-year forward look. And also, this time last year, I and others were big fans of just brutal pragmatism. If there's so much uncertainty to come around spending reviews, budgets, multi-year settlements, etc., that if you can deal with the here and now, the coming year, probably less focus on the medium to long term. But this year, we've got a bit more certainty now. So how do you apply that brutal pragmatism in a world where CIPFA's own resilience index shows that in many organisations, reserves are down, increasing percentage of core funding going on to statutory people services, low resilience around income generation, and growing debt servicing costs. So I think it's going to be a really tricky time for many of your organisation's finance leaders, be it local government or anywhere else. So we're talking to all of those sorts of finance practitioners about how they go about doing multi-year planning, how they apply their judgments as professionals around things like, if you're in local government, the Section 25 report around the adequacy of reserves and the appropriateness of assumptions that are baked into the budget. So we'll say more on that. But I think my first plea, do have a chat with your lead finance professionals, see how they're getting on, because they're under huge pressure at the moment to continue being brutally pragmatic. But they've also got to be the truth tellers and say, well, hang on a minute, can we still make all of this add up? One of the things I want to flag is one of the things in the government's consultation about funding reforms talked about whether to move away from the requirement to balance in year every year. My view is that it's right to think radically in challenging times, but on this one in particular, I'm just dead against it. That it sounds potentially seductive, especially in that world of 1+2 years of planning. But think back at some of the other things that when they started, they probably also sounded seductive. EFS, exceptional financial support, it was a way of kicking the can down the road and not addressing some of the really challenging issues. But now I'd say it's becoming routine. It's not exceptional. And is it really support if you're just stacking up the debt? Send deficits, take it off the balance sheet. Well, yeah, great. That removes an immediate issue. But now fast forward a couple of years, we've got £4 billion liability mess. Delaying audit, because there were some delays and challenges there. Before you know it, audit isn't happening at all. So, things that can sound seductive in the immediate term and pragmatic suddenly become routine and move us further and further away from what makes for good quality financial management. I think if I broaden it out to look at funding reform a bit more broadly, it's clear that there's going to be, as with any change to formulae, there's going to be winners and losers. And we've seen some of the politics of it and the geographic impacts of it. And it's never easy when you've got outcomes that could be portrayed as winners or losers. But one view of it, well, it's just different slices of an inadequately sized cake. And so sometimes that leads to representative bodies sort of making pleas for a bigger cake, and or can we have more money, please? My view is that, looking at the state of the public finances and the fact that, whether it was enough or not is irrelevant, local government in particular did pretty well in recent settlements. There isn't going to be more money coming. The challenges facing the Chancellor and the government at large, you see in the media day by day. So I don't think it's realistic to just say, can we have more, please? So instead of asking for a bigger cake, my soundbite would be, we need to debate changing the recipe. And so I think that if the government is really looking to reset with their reshuffle and so on, I don't see local places and all of their public service partners, are they really being empowered and set free to work together on driving the wider determinants of growth? We often talk about concepts like wider determinants of health, but wider determinants of growth. Do we want to see councils and health partners and other public services, not just as providers of acute services, but as catalysts for prevention, drivers of local economic growth, stewards of community resilience? So I'd love to see from the government in the coming weeks and months, even more partnership work to say, how do we get every public service locally collaborating together to really drive growth? If that's the number one mission facing the country, I think that there's more that can be done there. And so it's not just funding for immediate survival, it's funding to drive long-term outcomes. I think it's worth recognising as well in this environment that it is politically volatile, that we've seen ballot box change and we've seen reform councils and focus on DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. The first thing I really, really want to say is I have 100% respect for local democratic mandates. And so it is absolutely right that any council that comes in and has a mandate to effect change, well, they have every right to effect change. I think my concern comes if they don't go about pursuing that change in a way that builds partnership and mutual respect between elected officials and officials or officers, particularly on senior finance. They're under huge pressure at the moment. Some have been called out as bureaucratic blockers. I don't think that helps that partnership and mutual respect. So again, do make sure you're reaching out to any colleagues impacted by this. In my experience, every officer just wants to work in partnership and help their elected officials be successful. And so I was really pleased that CIPFA and Solace and Lawyers in Local Government issued a report recently just reinforcing the statutory and professional responsibilities and legislative obligations, legal obligations that in particular those three Golden Triangle officers face: the head of paid service, the 151 and the chief legal officer. But of course there's lots of statutory officers in many of our services. And so it's really, really important for them to reinforce what they are required to be doing whilst working in partnership, hopefully in a spirit of mutual respect. I think efficiency, always up for looking at things afresh. Again, it's absolutely appropriate so long as it's done in the right, respectful way. Some of the things I've heard, well, that's political reprioritisation, and that's legitimate. Is it truly efficiency? I'm not seeing a huge amount of that just yet. But again, I do see that growing, and with hundreds of seats up next year, that's one we've got to keep a look at. A couple more things, and then I'll pause and we can hopefully turn it into a conversation. So particularly close to all your hearts, of course, all workforce challenges. From my perspective, looking at finance and finance workforce challenges, CIPFA did a report last year in partnership with the LGA that we created a finance workforce action plan. And whilst the focus of that report was local government in England, its themes and findings and principles, I think, are common to any public service organisation, region, etc. The findings that came out were, no surprise, increasing numbers of vacancies, increasing numbers of agency use, increasing turnover, whether it be related to retirement, early or otherwise, perceptions of pay, perceptions of workload, etc. But we also found that few organisations had formal workforce development plans or sort of finance-specific plans. So our recommendations were around looking at leadership capacity and capability, making sure there are greater CFO pathways both internal development to attract people into public service, looking at tools like mentoring and support, really paying attention to the attractiveness of progression to senior roles. You'll be seeing this across many other professions, I'm sure, but so I'm here mainly talking about the finance ones. Attracting and recruiting the right staff. It's not just about pay, but you know more than me, the wider employee value proposition. Are we addressing the negativity that can be around public service working? And so making sure that we are creating attractive conditions. And then when we do get people in, workforce and training plans, commitment to support for CPD, etc. So we're looking to support that. I say it has been made harder in my world by the removal of level 7 apprenticeship funding from the start of next year. Personally, I respect the fact that the government came to the view that, was that funding intended to fund middle managers doing MBAs, to sort of paraphrase? Probably not, but we've got so many examples of people from underrepresented groups coming into pathways to public finance roles through that apprenticeship levy. So I think that's going to have a devastating impact on the number of people coming into public finance. And that's not a good thing for a sector that spends 45% of GDP. So we've got to think of creative ways of keeping those pathways coming in to finance, because I do fear that with so many public service organisations facing financial constraints, they've got to pay their levy still, but they can't spend it on finance training. So logical conclusion, fewer people being funded to come into finance training. And obviously I'd love it if they all trained with CIPFA, but whoever they train with, fewer people coming into public finance is not a good thing. So we're trying to respond and support practitioners. We've developed a brand new competency framework. So wherever you are in your career in finance, whether you're a student and newly qualified, a sort of aspiring leader or a senior leader, we've got a modern competency framework that draws on not just the technical stuff, but the changing world around us, the emotional intelligence needs, the managing complex stakeholder environments, the embracing technology, the emotional intelligence needed to be successful. So we're launching that this autumn alongside a self-assessment tool. So wherever you are in your career, you can self-assess, say, yeah, strong there, I've got development requirements there, with links to personalised CPD. You can help. I don't know if any of your organisations have job descriptions that are full of impenetrable jargon. Are we doing enough to really sell the mission and purpose of our public service organisations? I shared a couple of things that in my previous organisation that we were doing with my 18-year-old daughter, and she was looking at me going, yeah, no, it looks really attractive, Dad. And so, what are we doing to make our organisations, our roles attractive to new generations who look at things in a very different light? One practical example, we've started using Instagram, and obviously pictures, like big headshots of like old grey blokes like me saying, oh, come and have a look at public finance. Again, my daughter looks at me and goes, no, you're great, Dad, but I'm not going to look at that, am I? So making sure that we've got the right people doing the right sort of attraction tools, whether it be on Instagram, TikTok, and so on. But let's not embarrass ourselves. Let's get the right people doing it in there. So let me close this first bit. It is tough, there's no question, but I'm always passionate about saying let's close with some positives. It remains the case that all of our organisations are still spending billions of pounds working with millions of public servants delivering services that really matter in our communities. So all of us have an obligation as leaders to recognise and celebrate that good stuff every day. We're not being naive or ignoring the huge challenges, but let's not only focus on those really tricky issues. Let's all celebrate public service as well, because it's still absolutely amazing. Let's still really work on those close partnerships between governance folks or elected people and senior officers. Those partnerships are under pressure. I think we have to really defend them. And whatever organisational structures exist, whether it be LGR changes or what health are going through some changes at the moment. So ICB is now, I think there's one for Western Europe, is my joke of the day. But whatever it is structured locally, we all have the ability to carve out time to sustain local partnerships, to work together in communities, whatever our lanyards say our organisation is, to really find new innovative ways to just keep going and still deliver that public service. So few reflections for me to start, but hopefully we can turn it into a conversation and take it wherever you want. So back to you, Gordon.
Thanks, Owen. That's really, really interesting. And I think it's hugely helpful to have the picture painted of the landscape now, predicting over the next few years, talking about the intrinsic links between finance and the workforce. And as someone who's in the ESF club, but also a best value notice club, yeah, it's really tough. And your point wasn't wasted around, the pressure that is on all of us, but in particular, finance colleagues who are the money always bubbles up to the top of the priority list for obvious reasons. I was going to maybe, I've got anything in the chat, and more people are thinking about questions, maybe just picking up obviously where you ended. So I think as an HR profession, we're probably naturally optimistic. But I suppose maybe I'm interested in what you think the levels of optimism for the next few years are for the sector, given the complexity, no more money flowing in, some of the demands on us, etc. And actually linking into some of the other things we talked about today, are we moving fast enough as a sector with technology to modernize, driving down costs, becoming more productive and efficient, etc. So just kind of interested in that sort of area.
So I love the way you said that it's inherent to your profession. I think it's important that we make it inherent to our species, that we've got to stay upbeat, because I vividly remember being in a leadership conference where Dame Louise Casey basically tore strips out of everybody in the room and said, look, you are all way too senior and way too well paid to come into work moping and not just get to grips with what needs doing to serve the people in your community who are not in the privileged positions you're in. So it so resonated with me. So I think we have an obligation to stay positive. Again, not whilst being naive, but absolutely that. I also feel that, yes, there's huge challenges, and there's going to be continued constraints on public finances, absolutely. But you mentioned technology. It's going to be tricky to carve out enough time to stay curious and to try new things and test and learn, improve, and so on. But, there will be the ability to do things in radically different ways, and that will help. We're all seeing it on a peripheral level already on things like whether you're a co-pilot or a GPT user or whatever. I'm sure you're already finding ways to make your day less, or to remove friction, or I'm stunned by what we can now do just on going about our stuff. And so if you sort of scale that up, there is still a lot of stodge that exists in many of our public services. And, we are delivering services to people who are experiencing it in their private lives. Again, back to my teenagers, in a world where they're saying, oh, what do you mean? It's not being delivered until tomorrow. That's the expectation now. So what are we doing in our public services to adopt that mindset? Now, one caution, I don't know if you saw it in The Guardian recently, there was an amazing article that wrote up a report that the London School of Economics had done, because there are several councils that are using large language models to help with their adult social care casework. Fantastic. So many words, so many notes, fantastic. But surprise, surprise, those models are drawing on some of those original algorithms and so on that we know are hugely biased because they were written by tech bros in California who do not have a diverse life outlook. And they showed by testing that there was too many cases where the case notes for Mr. Smith were put in, and the outcome was struggling with his leg, so therefore 3 visits a week and an adjustment to the house. Change nothing but the turn it to Mrs. Smith with exactly the same information, it was spitting out, well, she really values her independence, and so no additional support, please. That is awful. So it's not surprised because it draws from the world around us, but let's just be on the cautious side to make sure we're not amplifying biased or unequal outcomes. But yeah, let me finish on that bit. Technology will transform what we do, and it's up to all of us to stay inquisitive and learn and see how we can do it. Because if it doesn't transform productivity, we will be replaced by something else that does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Let me bring Steve in.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. I think you made some great points earlier about yeah, there's lots of wicked problems, if you like, but I think it's also about you're talking about partnership and collaboration, and it's important. There's lots of ability and knowledge out there, but it's just trying to make sure that everybody pulls together. And you talk about some of the political challenges, and that happens from a small p basis within the organisations as well. But
So
I think it's just trying to sort of find a collaborative approach to saying, look, everybody's in this together. We're all suffering the same sort of issues, the problems, and it's just trying to find a way to pull together and work together with colleagues, partner organisations, and that to resolve the issues. So I think the points you were making there about um, that partnership working, that collaboration, really important. And just trying to sort of instill that going forward and trying to make sure that things
absolutely.
work well.
And thank you for the comment, Stephen. I completely agree. An analogy I use a lot is that, and of course I get it, that with LGR and so on, it is impactful. There is genuinely competing views for what's right. There's risk of turkeys and Christmas. There's politics. There's history. So I get it. Of course, it's hard. But flip it on its head, from a service user's perspective, we know this from our personal lives. Everybody out there who delivers public services are just them. They don't care whether you work for this trust or that type of trust in the NHS, or this type of council, or that type of council, or central government or local. It's just them. So we have an obligation to emotionally take our lanyards off and organise ourselves around what best works for people and how they live their lives, not the hoops and processes we make them administratively jump through. So yeah, I'm not naive. It is hard. There's lots of factors, but we all can make a choice about the posture we bring to the way that we build and use local partnerships. Thanks, Steve.
Let me just get off mute. Anybody else got any other questions? I've got another one if nobody else comes forward. No. Just thinking, you talked about, don't necessarily always want to talk about the negative, but the exceptional financial support, and A, it's not exceptional, and B, it's not really support. It's we have to find a way of paying back, etc. We've got long-term ideas, and you've talked through a lot of those. But in the short term, what would be better, or is there not a better way at the moment for ESF?
Oh, it's really tough because I'm aware that it started in the run up to an election, and how many people want a spate of 114s in the run up to an election. It's continued with a new government, and what new government would want? Oh, a whole bunch of 114s. So I'm a realist as well, and so I'm calling out the challenges of it. But it is the only game in town at the moment. Now that is going to be changing, and so again, whether you agree or disagree with the proportions or the funding formula and so on, the funding reforms that have been brought in, we've been calling them for them for ages. So it would be pretty unreasonable to go, well, no, I'd wanted different reforms, thank you. So we've got to embrace those. We've got to recognise that there will be some transitional support needed, that some councils will be losing a big chunk of what they were expecting, and there will be flaws in there, of course, to ensure no council falls below a particular level. But I think we've got to just really embrace some of those things. We've got to continue to work in partnership with our councillors to make hard decisions early. That's hard in the current political cycle, but we've got to keep being those truth tellers and say, well, look, you can defer it to them, but the problem just gets bigger, and it will require those decisions. And I think we've got to really keep calling for the reforms that are still needed. That we talked about SEND and how there's going to be a white paper this autumn. We know how contentious that's going to be. And whilst in some ways it's good that there's another review of adult social care, and as I said earlier, I've got huge regard for Dame Casey as a leader of that. But the first phase of that is only really looking to get to see how the current money can be spent better. It's not really going to drive the levers of demand. So I'm struggling to come up with some alternatives because it's such a challenging situation. But all the things we've talked about of just keep going with a determination to get clarity on what the current situation is, what the options are to try and save money in the short term, make the cases to government for support where necessary. I haven't got, and it is hard, so I haven't got some magic bullets. But I go back to the principles. What makes for good? People collaborating within organisations, people collaborating between organisations, and being prepared to consider radical change, even if that means changing long-standing ways of doing things, because some of those will be needed.
That's great. Thank you, Owen. And collaboration being a great point, is that's exactly what we're doing at the moment.
Absolutely.
Just got a point, Samantha Buckley. Do you want to come on the call or just pick up the chat, Samantha?
It was entirely, as I've said on the comment, really. I think that we could do more with the redeployment of staff, because we see big numbers of staff leaving the organisation from 55 onwards. We have issues with, obviously our ageing workforce. We have issues around the impact on our finances around the redundancy costs that we have to pay. And then obviously longer pensions to pay as a result of it, and also the skills shortages and the lack of organisational knowledge. So I think that there could be better creative ways of councils working together to perhaps retain staff in this manner, with obviously a greater reduction in the cost that we need to pay out. So that was all.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Absolutely. And I'd also, it just reminds me of the thing I was discussing earlier about the attractiveness of our profession, of our services, of our organisations, that we have an unbelievable mission and mandate to do stuff that matters. But I think we're often on the back foot and defensive. And so I think there's been some great programs, LGA and others have done them. But a lot of people don't really know what it is to work for their local public service. So I think the more that we can sell that as a positive vision. But yeah, I completely agree with the comment you're making. Gordon, let me just close by saying a massive thank you again for the invitation. Always a pleasure to talk. And as I say, from my time in local government as a finance director and as a chief executive, I've just got huge regard for the difficult work that you do. And often, as with many corporate services providers, you're only in the headlights when things are difficult or going wrong. So just a sincere thank you to everybody for all you do.
And thank you, Owen, for taking the time to share some reflections with us. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. All the best.
Thank you. So we've just finished slightly early.